amazing. Thank you very much. That's a lot of words. I didn't realise when I wrote the title that you were going to say it so many times, and every time it's longer. As you said, my name's Doug. I work for a company called Green Energy and Carbon Management. To simplify it really quickly, we do engineering consultancy with a focus on energy efficiency and carbon strategy, which encompasses an enormous amount of things, all the way from businesses that have no idea where to start and really want to find opportunities, through to businesses that have been doing this for the last 15, 20 years and just want to tweak their strategy or whatever it is to approach net zero or carbon neutrality. Oh, I already had this, sorry. A bit more about us. We're a small business. We're only 3 years old. We've come out of a lot of other businesses in the industry. I've worked with all my colleagues at different times through my career, and we realised that there was a bit of a niche in the sector. A lot of our industry colleagues and competitors in the space have moved right into the strategy side of things. They don't do much site-based work anymore. So we make a big focus on getting out to sites and doing that site engineering work as well. And jumping straight into it, so who are people that we can help? And it's really everyone. The thing that we're finding at the moment is that everyone who approaches us is coming at it from a slightly different angle. There are businesses who have they've been approached by their corporate, a fleet of businesses that are owned by an international corporate that's pushing requirements down onto their children companies, expecting energy efficiency or emissions reductions. We're finding a lot of people that really their main driver is cost. The energy bills have gone up. They don't know why. The only data they've got is the data that comes on a bill once a month, and they just don't know what to do with that and how to move forwards. So it's trying to adapt to all of these businesses, and the Australian manufacturing fleet is an aging fleet. We find businesses that have been working really hard on this for the last 10, 20 years that know what the problems are, and then we find businesses that just they're struggling to stay afloat. The last thing that they're thinking about is how efficient their processes are, and these are things that can actually help them with their bottom line. One thing that we're finding more and more recently is the impact of consumers expecting businesses to focus on carbon emissions. And we've had a lot of businesses come to us recently because their consumers are asking whether they're supplying into one of the top tier supermarkets, Coles and Woolworths. They're really pushing the requirement for carbon reduction down onto their suppliers. And a lot of suppliers just don't know where to start. And this has been exacerbated by mandatory climate-related financial disclosure. So you might not be aware of it, but interestingly, writing these slides a few weeks ago, having to submit them before the election, I wasn't sure whether this would be relevant or not, because the Liberal Party had planned if they'd got into ACT's mandatory climate-related financial disclosure. But with the result that we got on the weekends, mandatory climate-related financial disclosure, another lot of long words, is here to stay. And that's going to mean that businesses above a certain size, over the next sort of 6 years, it's going to be rolled out more and more. But these businesses are going to have to report annually on what their carbon emissions are. That's fine. And you might think, or one of our clients might think that Group 3, which doesn't have to report until the 1st of July 2027, and even then, they actually won't be reporting for 12 months after that. But I'm not in that size range. I don't have $50 million a year of consolidated revenue or whatever it is. The issue that we've identified is that in Scope 3 emissions reporting, the businesses like Coles and Woolworths and the big mining companies, they're going to expect all of their suppliers to be a part of their reporting, because their Scope 3 emissions are their suppliers' Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And as a result, we're going to find in 3-6 years, when these businesses are looking to their suppliers, there's going to be a lot of companies that just don't know where to start with this. And so we're really recommending to anyone that we can talk to get ahead, because I think that come the day when, if it's not Coles or Woolies, it's BHP or someone like that is pushing down to a supplier of theirs, I need by July the 31st your emissions data on the products you supply to us. We're going to end up with a huge press of businesses looking for more information in that space. And what can you do about it? So we like to break it into a pathway. There's a lot more steps than this, but to simplify it, it's a 4-stage process. This is really looking at focusing on a carbon outcome or an emissions outcome at the end of the roadmap. But the first and the most important place is to invest in direct action first. Is there stuff that you can do in your facility, in your business, to reduce your energy consumption and your emissions before you go and looking at other things? And that can start with, doing an energy audit or whatever it might be first. If you really don't know where to start, getting someone to come in and have a look at your business and help you find opportunities. But from there, those opportunities can look like all sorts of things. They can be, as is listed, process optimizations, energy efficiency projects, and then from there, because there are going to be businesses, especially in the consulting space, lots of business-to-business advisory businesses like ours, and our emissions aren't very large, but they're hard to avoid. So we have suppliers of paperwork and that kind of thing that's what's going to make up the majority of our emissions. Who are we using for our IT services and all that kind of stuff, which the only way to reduce your emissions there is by pushing that back to the supplier or putting it into your procurement policies, that when you are looking to engage a new IT provider, buy another ream of paper from Officeworks, whatever it is, look at investing in maybe a slightly more expensive product that's the business that's manufactured it has already done some of the work in the space. From there, there's lots of smaller things, behavioural changes. Reducing air and land travel is an obvious one. I think we all benefited and didn't benefit a little bit from COVID in that respect. It's taught us all that it is possible to have a meeting without flying to Queensland or to Sydney. But it's one of those things you just need to put into practice where you can. And then I think the next 2 points are 2 points that really come in tandem. So decarbonisation technologies and renewable investment. There's no point going out and investing in on-site solar or a wind farm if you have enough land for it to generate your own renewable power if in 2 years' time you're going to take all of your appliances that currently work on gas and convert them to electricity. Because your electricity load is going to go up, and then you're going to have to start renegotiating contracts that you'd built or taken on, assuming your load was going to stay steady. So we're really recommending that businesses that are looking to decarbonise and get towards net zero or carbon neutrality really consider where can they move away from fuels before they invest in renewables. And there are lots of ways to do that. Not unfortunately available to all businesses. We're finding a lot of our clients in the large industrial space have very high grade heat. So anything above sort of high pressure steam is very hard still to convert to electricity. But it is becoming more and more available. We're seeing heat pump technologies, more so at a trial size, but heat pump technologies that can get up to sort of 2-3 bar steam consistently. And then opportunities in biogas. So for businesses that do have organic waste, it can be a really easy opportunity to start looking at biogas for waste management, and it has the co-benefit that it then generates electricity in your premise. Once you have explored those technologies, then start looking at things like renewable investment, whether that's on-site solar, wind, or that's off-site renewables. So power purchase agreements, investing in either leasing land or speaking with local wind farms about signing power purchase agreements or purchasing green power to bring that into your portfolio of electricity emissions. From there, offsets unfortunately are the remaining solution. A lot of businesses and consumers are still a bit hesitant to go down the offsets path. It's unfortunately seen a bit of bad airtime recently. But I would suggest that there are still high quality offsets out there. Lots of projects for people that offset investment really does drive investment in carbon reduction projects. And if there's a limit to what you can do in your facility, looking at investing in other facilities and taking ownership of those reductions. We've got a couple of case studies. I think that the main thing I really wanted to point out here is there can be co-benefits along the way that people don't identify initially. This is one project that we're just getting towards the end of rolling out. So it's a large thermal insulation project, mostly on 170-degree steam pipe work. And we've partnered with an insulation provider that can custom manufacture insulation covers across a wide range of shapes and products. So we find a lot of the time in industrial facilities, their steam lines are lagged, but anything around valves or flanges, that kind of stuff tends not to be insulated. And the payback periods in these projects can be right down at 1 year. This is obviously a very large scale project, 16 sites across Australia. And the payback period averaged across the whole project was 1.7 years. But the co-benefits that really came with it were, I continue to work with these sites in these boiler rooms, and getting into a room where previously there was a whole lot of exposed surfaces at 170 degrees, and now they're all insulated. In the middle of summer, it makes walking into that room a whole lot more pleasant. And it's a significant safety improvement. So rather than someone walking along a pathway, you can really see in this top left-hand photo, there's a door at the end of that set of steam valves, and they're all 170 degrees most of the time. And then after the insulation's on, the highest temperature in that room is 76 degrees, but I'd almost guess or almost guarantee that that's a reflection of this valve that we have an insulated left up in the top right-hand corner. So we're finding that now it's a lot safer. We're having OH&S people that are also interested in these projects. So the co-benefits aren't just the payback on gas. The other side of this project is this particular client is currently, due to their scale, they're paying a very low price for gas. And as we forecast their gas price out over the next 5-10 years, the payback gets far more attractive. I'd like to, qualify this a little bit, because, as I said before, it is very hard to convert some gas appliances to electricity. Not just that, but the emissions of gas are still considerably lower than electricity. For the same amount of gas or the same energy content of gas, it's about 25% or there roughly of the emissions of the same energy content in electricity, due to mostly in Victoria, us using brown coal still. And there's a couple of caveats in there around that. But the other side of this is to keep in mind that projects like thermal insulation can reduce that thermal load on a site and mean that when you do go to electrify it, you really can reduce what that total energy requirement is. On top of that, heat pumps these days getting up, especially if you're combining heating and cooling in the same project, extracting waste heat from cooling systems, you can then get a coefficient of performance between the two of, up to 5, sometimes higher, depending on how well you integrate heating and cooling on your site. And we're finding that alleviates the concerns of the higher embodied emissions of electricity compared to gas. I think the other thing to say is that these electrification and fuel switching projects, they tend to have longer payback periods. They're not the same, simple low-hanging fruit projects that you get from some of the upfront energy efficiency stuff. So we're recommending to clients that where you can invest in quick wins first, make some savings over the coming years with those projects, and then look at either recovering that value and investing it into future projects, or looking at, if there's rebate revenue associated with your first few projects, taking that and investing it into future opportunities. As before, I will say, do keep in mind that this won't immediately reduce emissions, and in the short term, it'll increase your electricity usage at the very least. So that's when you have to really start looking at renewable investment. And on the renewable investment front, we're really trying hard to split it into that on-site and off-site. Anything that's on-site and is investment in generation directly, that will reduce your ongoing electricity bills in the near future and carrying through. Whereas when you start looking at off-site investment, so buying into wind farms, solar farms and that kind of thing, and purchasing green power and other electricity style renewables, that becomes then an ongoing cost. So you're effectively driving up your electricity price, which is just to hark back to energy efficiency first. That's why we recommend, where you can, do what you can with your site before anything else. I think from here, moving into offsets effectively is looking at net zero emissions and what that actually is. And we find that a lot of the businesses we work with, and especially consumers these days, when you look in the news and read so many articles about people that are, cracking down on climate active upgrade or climate active certifications. I don't know if everyone here knows what climate active is, but it's Australia's government certified carbon neutrality program. But it gets a lot of bad press, and it gets a lot of bad press because people buy offsets from non-credible sources. And that's something that's really worth keeping in mind. The other side of it is that there's a surprisingly big distinction between carbon neutrality and net zero emissions. I think a lot of people really don't realise that they don't mean the same thing. And carbon neutrality can sometimes refer to someone who's done their carbon accounting, they've worked out what their emissions are, and then they've gone over and bought the cheapest international offsets they can, down at 50 cents per tonne of carbon, and they've said, we no longer have carbon emissions because we've bought these projects from some deforestation project over in Brazil or wherever it might be, which doesn't have guaranteed carbon reductions. And that's then caused them to get some really terrible press recently. The other side of it, net zero emissions, the distinction here is you can't get a certified net zero emissions brand without first focusing on direct action. And any certification scheme that calls someone net zero emissions, they will have gone through a process of developing a roadmap for energy reduction first and proving that they're achieving tangible, direct results before they're just offsetting all their emissions. So as a consumer, I think it's really important that people are better educated. Is it easy to do? I don't think it is. But that's the world that we live in these days. And from there comes the serious discussion about offsets, which I do have on a later slide. But quickly on the certification framework side of things, it again is a whole gamut of bits and pieces. What can businesses do? You'll find these days on a lot of businesses' websites, there are all sorts of logos that say that people have done this or that, and it's not always clear exactly what that means. We've roughly broken it down into 4 groups. The first group, greenhouse gas accounting, that is the framework that most of these systems work on. So it's a process for identifying what your emissions are before then doing something about it. The stepping stones are the climate group, which does a few, RE100 being the most well known, and that is businesses that have procured all of their electricity from renewable sources. And there's a whole lot of rules about how they can do that, whether that's on-site renewables or off-site renewables. From there, there's the carbon neutral businesses, one of which is climate active. And climate active is the one that, as I said earlier, has received a lot of negative press recently. And it's because of those people that have gone out there, they've done their carbon accounting, worked out what their emissions are, and bought a 50-cent certificate to say, everything that I'm doing on my site is now carbon neutral. And then from there, the next category is those net zero emissions certifications. And the best well-known one at the moment is science-based targets. And that's a really rigorous process. For a business to be science-based targets certified, they have to do annual auditing. They have to prove that they're constantly identifying and implementing efficiency measures. How are they reducing their own emissions before doing anything using offsets? It still allows a percentage of offsets because, as I said earlier, there are businesses that can't reduce their emissions to zero, especially if you look at emissions that include things like employee commuting and that kind of stuff. It's just something that you're never going to get to zero. So there are some leeway allowed for that. But then the last group is probably the most important at the moment, and that's the mandatory reporting frameworks. So firstly, the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Framework, which is otherwise known as NGERS. So there are already a large number of businesses over a significant size threshold in Australia that have to, with their emissions report, with their financial reporting every year, they're forced to do emissions reporting as well. And then going forwards, that mandatory climate-related financial disclosure program will push this down to smaller and smaller businesses. And then I think in time, everyone will be affected one way or another if you supply to anyone on that list. Lastly, on the offsets front, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string. And I've come from an industry where we've engaged more on the offsets front, but it's a space that there are very high quality offsets out there. I mean, there are businesses in this room that have they've invested money in energy efficiency projects, and they've done robust calculations to work out exactly what the emissions reductions associated with those are. They've taken that information and they've assigned the rights to those reductions into certificates that can be purchased by other Australian consumers, and they can be offset. Unfortunately, it goes all the way down to, as I said before, Brazilian deforestation projects where someone's pointed at a tree and said, I won't cut that down if you give me $100. Can we guarantee they weren't going to cut it down anyway? Absolutely not. But there is a middle ground. The Australian schemes, unfortunately, are incredibly expensive to take in. LGCs and ACCUs compared to international offsets are around the sort of $40 a tonne mark, where there are still high quality international offsets that sit around the $2 mark. And they're for projects like renewables investment in developing nations. And so something we're really recommending for people that aren't prepared to pay the $40 a tonne for Australian offsets. Things like Indian wind and solar investment, it has a really amazing co-benefits that it also improves air quality significantly in other countries, India and other similar countries, because any energy that they're not creating using low quality coal or gas power is improving their quality of life over there. So that's really the last point that I wanted to make is taking those options, large-scale generation certificates for electricity as a first port of call if you're prepared to pay for it, ACCUs for anything else, again, with a price tag, and then Indian renewable projects and similar are definitely an alternative option for businesses that aren't prepared to fork out that same amount of money. And the last point on specifically certification is I think that above all other things, the most important thing is for businesses to be transparent and specific in what they're claiming. So many businesses that do get done for greenwashing and that kind of stuff, it's because the claim they're making is hard to verify. It's vague and it's unclear exactly what their roadmap looks like. So if you do go and make a public claim that you're reducing your emissions, make sure you're very clear about what it is you're doing and make it easy for people to access that information. Yeah. And that's the bones of what I had to say. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to yell them out. Otherwise, find me afterwards, and I'm happy to have a chat.
Any questions for Doug? Big round of applause for Doug. Thank you so much. Doug's going to hang around if you have any further questions. That's fantastic.